Hey guys, tonight we're slipping into a quieter corner of American history, one that's not often framed in textbooks, but almost always hung over the fireplace. We're entering the world of mourning portraiture, the strange, intimate art of painting the dead in 19th century America. You're not just a painter, you're a witness, a worker, a secret keeper, and tonight you have a job. You're standing on a creaking porch in upstate New York. It's early morning. Mist clings low to the ground like spilled milk, and your boots leave half moons in the frost hardened dirt. Inside the farmhouse, a girl has died. 8 years old. Scarlet fever, they said. You don't ask. You never ask. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step inside and it's quiet. Not the warm library kind of quiet. This is a hush thick with grief. Furniture sits stiff against the walls like it's holding its breath. Someone has placed black cloth over the mirror because superstition says a spirit might get stuck in the glass. You've seen this before. Many times. Too many. The mother is waiting in the parlor. She's dressed in full mourning black. Veil down, hands twisted into each other like vines. She doesn't cry. She's moved beyond tears into a kind of functional sorrow, the kind that makes tea and answers the door. She gestures upstairs. No words. Your supplies are heavy today. Canvas rolled tight in one arm, a wooden box of brushes and pigments bumping against your thigh. Inside the box, burnt umber, bone black, a few borrowed bits of cobalt if you're lucky. You don't need much. The dead don't require a full pallet. The stairs groan as you climb. At the top, a bedroom door is open, and behind it, a child's bed, a girl lying still beneath a crocheted quilt, and a smell. You know the one, sweet and sickly, like cut flowers left too long in the vase. She's only just passed, maybe 5, 6 hours ago. Her skin is still soft. That's good. You can work with that. She's been arranged already. Hair brushed, smooth and tied with a blue ribbon. A favorite doll placed beside her head. Her hands crossed at the chest. Fingers still curved like she was holding something in a dream. You set up near the window. The light is good here. Gray and diffused, like sorrow itself. No harsh shadows. You like that. You unfold your easel, stretch the canvas, and begin to sketch. You start with the outline of the face. Soft, round, childish. Her features are delicate but not idealized. This isn't about beauty. It's about memory. About stopping time. You glance at her face every few seconds, committing the curve of her jaw, the tilt of her nose, the small dip where her chin folds into her neck. She's wearing a locket. You'll include it. They always want the locket. An hour in, the father enters the room. You've learned to hear them before they speak. The heavy, purposeful tread of men pretending not to cry. He stands behind you, breathes, says, "You'll make her look peaceful, won't you?" You nod, and he leaves. That's the whole exchange. You dip your brush into a thin wash of ivory paint and begin filling the space around her pupils. Eyes are the hardest, especially when they're closed. But today they're open. Someone propped them with a bit of wax. You work quickly. There's always a moment, about 3 hours in, where you forget she's dead. You catch yourself thinking, she'll move soon. or her eyes will blink. But of course they don't. They never do. Outside, a crow calls once, twice, then nothing. You shift in your stool. Your back aches. You've been in this position before, with different faces, different beds, but the same silence. This isn't just painting. It's holding grief in your hands and pretending it doesn't shake you. Halfway through, you pause to drink water from a tin flask. You don't eat on the job. Food feels wrong here. The air is thick with lavender oil and camphor, and something else, something faintly wrong, already creeping in. You'll have to work faster. Sometimes you wonder how you ended up here. You trained to paint landscapes, rolling hills, rivers, trees with shadows that fall just so. But people started dying, and families started asking, and you started saying yes. The brush moves on its own now. Your fingers know the lines, the shading, the way to soften the jaw so she looks like she's still dreaming. Historians still argue whether these portraits were art or therapy. You think maybe they were both. A strange communion between painter and painted, between those who stay and those who go. The last touch is the doll. You add it with gentle color. It's ugly, lopsided, hand stitched, but you paint it with care, because to her, it mattered. You don't varnish. That will come later. You just wrap the canvas gently and descend the stairs where the mother is waiting with a small purse in her lap. She doesn't open it. She just says, "Thank you," and you nod. Outside, the air feels colder than it did this morning. The sky has clouded over, and the mud clings to your boots like regret. You mount your cart and ride away. The painting beside you, the girl behind you. You don't look back. You didn't exactly plan for this life. No child in a one-room schoolhouse ever stood up and said, "I want to grow up and paint dead people." But here you are, bumping along another country road, canvas tucked under your arm, and the smell of linseed oil soaked into your coat sleeves like a permanent tattoo. You used to think you'd be a society painter. Catch a train to Boston or Philadelphia, sketch portraits of gentlemen with impressive sideburns and wives draped in pearls. Maybe even hang a piece in a salon someday, under gaslight, with people saying things like delicate brushwork and inspired by the Dutch masters. Instead, your name's been passed from grieving family to grieving family, whispered like a last-ditch hope. When a child dies, when a young mother is taken too soon, when a family wants one last keepsake before the coffin's nailed shut, someone always says, "There's a man who paints them, quietly, kindly." So you became that man. There's business in grief. Not that anyone talks about it that way. They call it a comfort or a gift. But you know the truth. Every tear-streaked handshake is also a transaction. You've charged $1 for a portrait and been given 5. You've charged 10 and been paid with a pair of chickens and a bottle of rye. You don't argue. Grief doesn't like haggling. This latest job takes you into town. A banker's wife, they said. Pneumonia. Only 30. No children. You wonder if that makes it harder or easier. Harder, maybe. No one left behind to remember her except the man holding the pocketbook and the receipt for your work. You knock on the door of a row house with green shutters and fresh paint. Fancier than most. The kind of place that says, "Someone is surviving comfortably here." But not today. Inside, the banker sits with his head in his hands. You're greeted instead by a housemaid who speaks in a whisper, as if the walls might shatter if her voice goes above a murmur. She leads you to a parlor where the body lies, already washed, dressed, and arranged. The dress is cream silk, expensive, but her skin has already turned, and you'll need to warm it on canvas. You unpack your tools like a doctor preparing for a strange surgery. Sketchbook, charcoal, brushes lined like surgical instruments. You know what to do. This is not your first well lit, well dressed corpse. You begin. Her face is elegant, but the tension's gone. You add it back with subtle shadows. Lift the corners of the mouth with the faintest curve, just enough to suggest a memory. Not a smile, a memory of one. You've learned to paint quickly because grief moves fast. Families change their minds. Coffins don't wait. And death, like a bad dinner guest, overstays its welcome. So you don't dawdle. The banker checks in once, says, "You've made her look younger." You nod. He doesn't say if that's good or bad. He just leaves again. Your brush dances in practiced rhythm. You layer and blend, soften and shape, until her face looks less like death and more like a fading dream. You add her wedding ring, though it's hidden beneath her folded hands. The housemaid requested it. He'll want to see it, even if he doesn't say so. By noon, you're done. You show the portrait to the banker. He stares too long, long enough that you begin to shift uncomfortably. Then he nods once, tight, and hands you a thin envelope. You don't count the money until you're outside. You never get used to leaving. There's no applause, no framed unveilings, no clients returning to gush about how well you captured the light in their daughter's eyes. Just a front door that closes softly behind you, and a street that looks exactly the same as when you arrived. Historians still argue whether Mourning portrait painters were artists or tradesmen, whether what you do is creation or imitation. You don't much care for the debate. You just know that your hands ache from the brush, and your heart aches from the stillness in every room you leave behind. Sometimes you catch yourself thinking of how many faces your work has preserved. Dozens, maybe more. Yet no one knows your name. No one remembers the painter, just the painting. You are a footnote in someone else's sorrow. But you do it anyway, because someone has to. Someone has to paint the grief. You wake before dawn again. Not because you want to, but because grief has its own schedule, and it rarely respects yours. A knock came late last night. Loud, sharp. The kind of knock that says someone has died and someone else is trying very hard not to fall apart. You barely open the door before the boy, 14 maybe, hands like twigs, blurted, "My baby sister. Mama says, come now, please." So now you're here, shivering on a rickety cart as it trundles along a half-frozen road toward a small farmhouse in the distance. The sun isn't even considering rising yet. Your breath fogs in the air like smoke. You haven't had coffee. You haven't eaten. But you have your brushes, your pigment satchel, and the worn canvas roll tucked beneath your arm like a sacred scroll. Inside, the house is dim. Someone's lit oil lamps, but they flicker low. Shadows flicker higher. You're greeted not with words, but a nod. A woman with red-rimmed eyes and a baby bundled in a blanket so tight you can't see her face. "She's still warm," the woman says. Her voice is flat, but her hands tremble. That's not an uncommon sentence in your line of work. Still warm, still soft. Sometimes, barely, not still. You've painted children who had only stopped breathing an hour before. Infants wrapped in baptism gowns, toddlers curled around wooden toys, newborns never given a name. The line between just born and just gone is heartbreakingly thin. They lead you to a cradle. Inside lies the tiniest child you've ever seen. A little girl, maybe 6 weeks old, maybe less. Her cheeks are pale, her lips faintly parted, and her hands tucked under her chin like she's still waiting for a lullaby. This is the part no one understands unless they've done it. You feel responsible, not just to capture her face, but to somehow honor her, to give this family something more than the memory of a grave, a tangible proof that she existed, that she mattered. You pull up a chair and begin. The brush feels too big for this job. Her features are barely there, delicate as moth wings. But you work slowly, layering in softness, touching the corners of her mouth with warmth the room no longer holds. The mother sits across the room, silent, not watching you, just holding her own knees and rocking gently, back and forth, like a boat in shallow water. You add the bonnet they gave you, pale blue, hand-stitched, a single crooked ribbon curling over one ear. You paint it faithfully. Imperfections matter. The curve of the stitch, the smudge on the fabric. You want the mother to look at this later and remember, not imagine. Time passes strangely when you're painting grief. Sometimes it rushes forward, sometimes it freezes. You look up and realize it's still only just morning, the sky barely lavender outside. And now the father enters. He says nothing, just kneels by the cradle, eyes red but dry. She never cried, he murmurs. Not once. Never heard her voice. You swallow hard. You nod. And then you turn back to the painting. You give her the faintest smile, not the kind that feels fake or saccharine, just a whisper of joy, a ghost of what might have been. Historians still argue whether mourning art softened death or simply dressed it in prettier clothes. Was it closure or was it denial with pigment and brush? You don't know. You just paint. The room warms as the fire grows in the hearth. The mother has stopped rocking. She's watching you now. You finish by noon. The father leans in and says softly, "It's her. I don't know how, but it is." That's the closest thing to praise you'll ever ask for. You wrap the portrait carefully. You say your quiet goodbyes. And as you step outside into the cold, the mother presses something into your hand, a small swaddled cloth. It's a baby bonnet, not the one you painted, a different one, for your next little one, she says, and shuts the door before you can answer. You stand there for a long moment, just you, the bonnet, and the wind. You've developed a strange relationship with silence. It fills every house you enter. Not the kind of silence that invites peace. No, this one hangs thick and slow, like syrup made of grief. It muffles footsteps, makes clocks tick louder than they should. Even your own heartbeat feels intrusive sometimes. And now here you are again, in a modest home near the edge of the Hudson River, where the floorboards slope and the walls sigh with wind. A teenage boy has died, a fall from a horse. They say it happened fast, though you know that doesn't make it easier. He's already been dressed. They laid him on the kitchen table, moved everything else out of the way. There's a Bible resting at his feet. Someone has tucked a single red carnation under his hand. That touch was probably his sister's doing. You nod to the family. Then you kneel beside him and begin arranging, gently, carefully, as always. The work starts with the chin. You cradle it lightly, adjusting the angles so it doesn't slump. You've learned to work with pillows, bricks, folded towels, whatever you can find. Today it's chalk blocks and a cloth napkin. No frills, just necessity. He's tall, longer than the space allows. His boots hang slightly off the edge of the table. The toes point downward like punctuation marks on a life just getting started. His mouth is slightly open. You consider closing it, but then think better. There's something honest about it, something real. You start your sketch. Your hands know the routine now. one fluid line at a time. The temple, the bridge of the nose, the soft curve of the cheek. You've painted sleeping boys and fallen men, soldiers and sons, but teenagers are hard. They carry that half grown look where a child's softness fights with a man's sharpness. And in death, it's frozen that way. You use a wider brush for his coat, which is black and stiff with starch. His mother insisted he wear his best. You imagine her upstairs now, pacing, unable to look, but unable to sit still. Grief makes people walk circles around themselves. As you paint, his little brother wanders in. You hear him before you see him. The soft creak of the floor, the deliberate hush of small feet. He stands beside you, arms crossed, and says, "He looks like he's sleeping." You nod. That's the idea. He thinks for a moment, then whispers, "Do you ever paint people who aren't dead?" You pause. The truth? Not lately. Not in years. Not since the demand for the living dried up and mourning became your calling card. Sometimes you say gently, "And let that be enough." The boy watches for a while, then toddles off without another word. A fringe tidbit from your line of work. Children handle death better than adults, most days. They ask simpler questions. They don't pretend to understand what they can't. You turn back to the painting. You add light, just a touch, around his hair. Not a halo, not quite, but enough to catch the eye. You've learned that families like that. It's comforting. A reminder, maybe, that something of their loved one remains beyond the table and the breathless room. His hand lies flat beside him, too stiff to adjust, so you work around it. The fingers look almost curled, as if holding something invisible. Historians still argue whether artists like you were more scientist or priest, whether your work was forensic or spiritual. But honestly, you're neither. You're a translator. Your job is to take death and whisper it back in the language of the living. The final touches go quickly. A wisp of hair across the brow, a softened fold of fabric. You blur the corners of the background, just enough to let him float a little. Not ghost-like, just lighter. You pack your things, fold your cloths, wipe your brushes clean with the care of someone washing off sorrow. You leave the house quietly. The boy's father meets you at the door with stiff fingers and wet eyes. "He would have gone far," he says, like it's the only line he could rehearse. You nod. You don't say, "They always would have." Back on the road, you glance back only once. The house tilts into the gray sky, a crooked box filled with heartbreak. You don't need to see inside again. You'll carry his face with you for weeks, maybe longer. You always do. You don't usually like to paint the eyes open. It's a request that comes more often than you'd expect. Can you make it look like she's awake? Can you leave his eyes just like that? As if the act of being seen, even in death, is the only thing keeping memory alive. You oblige when you must. But the truth is, painted open eyes always feel wrong. Still, here you are, a parlor in Connecticut, a girl of about 16, pale as moonlight, laid out on the family couch beneath a lace coverlet. Her mother wants her eyes painted open. She had the most beautiful hazel eyes, she says, placing a trembling hand over your sketchbook. It's what everyone noticed first. You nod, and you begin. She's been gone less than a day. Her eyes, with help from careful positioning and maybe a bit of wax, remain open, but dulled. No light catches in them anymore. Just a vacant glaze, like a mirror that's forgotten what it reflects. You sit close, too close, because you have to. Every fleck of gold in her iris needs to be accounted for. You mix ochre with burnt umber and the tiniest drop of blue. It's not exact, but it will do. You can't help but feel those eyes are watching you while you paint them, and not in the poetic sense. You know the difference between gaze and glass. You wonder, not for the first time, if this practice comforts the living or simply unsettles the dead. Historians still argue whether these portraits were tools of remembrance or gentle deceptions meant to soften the sharpness of reality. Either way, the eyes stay open, watching, unblinking. The girl's younger sister watches you work from the hallway. She's supposed to be napping, but grief doesn't respect bedtimes. She leans against the doorframe and says, Mama said she sees us from heaven. Can you put that in the picture? You glance up. Heaven? No, her seeing us. You nod. You won't paint wings. You won't add halos. But you will paint those eyes with a softness that suggests sight. Not the wide eyed, startled look of death, but something quieter. Knowing. You've learned how to cheat just a little with a highlight, a dot of white near the pupil, an upward tilt at the corners. Tricks, really. But grief responds well to gentle illusions. The family brings you tea, which you don't drink. They offer a muffin, which you pocket but won't eat until later, when the work is done. You don't like to mix food and mourning. The flavors never sit right. As you near the end of the painting, you study the eyes once more. Do they look alive? Not exactly, but they look loved, which sometimes is enough. You sign your name discreetly in the corner, so faint it could be mistaken for a shadow. You've never liked signing death. The mother returns. She says nothing for a long while. Then, you gave her back to me. You never know what to say to that. You nod, gently roll the canvas, and step outside into a sudden downpour. Of course, you pull your coat tighter, cradling the portrait beneath it like a sleeping child, and trudge down the road. The painting may dry. You, however, will stay damp all day. You're used to silence, but what unsettles you most is when they stare. The family, that is. Mothers, fathers, siblings with reddened noses and fingers twitching in their laps. You're there to do a job. Brushes, canvas, professional detachment, and all. But sometimes they watch you like they're waiting for a miracle to bloom under your brush. And sometimes they talk. Today, it's a farmhouse high on a hill. Late spring, yet the room is still chilly. A boy, around 10, lies on a narrow bed beneath a handmade quilt. He drowned 2 days ago. They found him near the river, clutching a stick, as if he was still pretending it was a sword. The father doesn't speak at all, just stands by the window, arms folded, chewing the inside of his cheek like it owes him money. But the mother, she hovers. She watches every stroke. Her hands flutter in front of her chest like wounded birds. Every now and then, she leans in too close, squints at the paint, and says things like, his cheeks were rosier than that, or he always had a cowlick, right there, or can you make him look like he's dreaming? You nod. You keep your voice low. You soften the edges of his mouth, paint a peaceful flush into his face, and give him the gentle turn of a dreamer in repose. You're good at that now, making the still seem soft instead of stiff. But you feel her breath on your neck as you paint, and every so often you have to stop, reposition yourself, and draw a quiet line between your work and her grief. You've learned. Everyone wants something different. Some want reality, every blemish, every freckle. Others want fantasy, the child alive and laughing, as if time never stopped. And some just want it to be over. This one, this one wants both. You paint the room out of the background, strip away the worn walls, the lopsided window. You add sky instead. Not blue sky, gray, peaceful, the kind you see just before rain. It's an old trick, but it works. They see heaven in it, even if you don't. There's a moment, mid paint, when the mother sits down behind you. You don't turn. You hear her whisper, "He wanted to be a train conductor. Said he'd ride all the way to Chicago and back. I told him we couldn't afford the ticket. He said that's okay. He'd drive it." You keep painting. You add a faint line across his hand. Not a scar, not a wound. Just the echo of a boy who held sticks like steering wheels and dreamed of whistles and tracks. She says, "He was afraid of the dark." So you make the painting light. No deep shadows, no nightfall, just the sort of light that might hang in a hallway when the door is cracked. Just enough to say it's okay, I'm still here. Historians still argue whether these moments, the ones families spill while you work, were part of the art or just emotional spillover. Some scholars call it memory transfer. Others say it was the era's version of therapy. You just know that when someone tells you their child wanted to ride trains, you find a way to paint that, even if no one else sees it. You finish. The mother cries, finally, quietly. She presses her fingers to her lips and whispers, "Thank you," though you suspect she means it more for her son than for you. You pack your brushes, roll the canvas with care, and head for the door. The father speaks for the first time. He looks ready, he says. You pause. You nod. Then step outside into a world that hasn't noticed a boy has left it. You're used to strange requests. They come with the territory. Some ask for open eyes. Others want smiles where none were. One man insisted you paint his late uncle holding a fishing pole, even though the man died in bed, nowhere near a river. But this request is different. This one starts with a dress and a lock of hair. You're called to a white clapboard house on the edge of town. The shutters are drawn. The porch creaks under your boots like it's warning you to tread softly. Inside, a baby lies in a bassinet near the fireplace. Not swaddled, not hidden, just placed. As if someone couldn't decide whether to bury or to cradle. The child's grandmother answers the door. She's dressed in deep mourning, the sort of layered black that looks heavy in every sense of the word. She doesn't offer tea, doesn't lead you in. She simply opens a cedar chest and pulls out a delicate christening gown. "We'd like her to wear this," she says, handing it to you like it's made of glass. You take it, nod. Then she hands you a small envelope. Inside, a lock of hair tied with pink ribbon. You swallow hard. She continues, "And if you can, we'd like the locket included. Her mother wore it in the hospital." She gestures to a tiny heart-shaped pendant resting near the bassinet. You place it gently next to your brushes. It's small, but heavy. Personal grief always is. You begin your work. The child's skin is pale, translucent in places. You'll need to warm it with color, but not too much. Too much and it looks false. Too little and it looks final. You dress the child gently, your hands moving with the care of a priest. You've done this more times than you care to count, but it never feels routine. Each baby is different, each grief bespoke. You nestle her on a velvet cushion someone has placed inside a shallow basket. The cushion is burgundy. It makes her look like a porcelain doll. You try not to think about that. As you sketch, the grandmother returns with a Bible. She sits nearby, flipping pages without looking at them. Her eyes stay fixed on the child. You work quietly. The lock of hair, golden, barely there, goes into the portrait last. Just a curl along the temple, a final note of life. Historians still argue whether these keepsake objects, the locks of hair, the tiny shoes, the lace gowns, were symbolic gestures or desperate anchors. You know the answer is yes to both. Grief doesn't follow a single thread. It knots itself around anything it can hold. You add the locket around her neck. Scale it down in the painting just enough to make it a whisper rather than a shout. You paint it closed, though you wonder what might be inside. A photo? A prayer? A wish? Outside, a mourning dove coos. The sound seeps into the room like soft water. You glance up. The grandmother is watching you. Her name was Eliza, she says. It means joyful. You don't ask how long she lived. The answer is in the silence. You finish. This time, you leave the canvas unrolled, letting the paint breathe. It rests gently on your lap as you wait near the door. The grandmother touches the edge of the painting, just once. She looks like she's sleeping, she whispers. You want to say something, anything, but nothing feels right. So you just nod. You return the dress, folded, unworn, a courtesy of paint. Then you walk out with the portrait, the smell of lavender and sorrow clinging to your clothes like forgotten perfume. The lock of hair stays behind, but the image, her face, her locket, her name goes with you forever. The room is warm, too warm. That's the first thing you notice as you step through the doorway of the little house by the edge of the orchard. The air inside is thick, sticky with perfume, camphor, and the cloying scent of cut roses pushed too close to a dying fire. Someone's tried very hard to mask something. You know what it is. You always do. The girl on the chaise has been gone for too long, longer than they admitted in the letter. Her skin is gray at the edges, her lips dry. They've combed her hair and powdered her face, but the truth clings to her like smoke. You set your bag down slowly, quietly. You don't comment on the heat. You don't mention the smell. You just nod at the father, who meets you at the threshold and says, "We wanted her remembered how she was, before the fever." You nod again. You say, "I'll do my best." You always do. You begin your work in the far corner of the room, where the light is poor, but the air is slightly cooler. You keep your coat on, not for warmth, out of habit. It makes you feel like a barrier between yourself and the task. The girl is 15, maybe 16, thin. Her cheeks still hold the remnants of a young flush, though you suspect it's rouge, applied hastily, maybe by her mother, maybe with shaking hands. You draw the outline slowly. Her face is soft, but already changing. You adjust your composition. A slightly tilted head, a cascade of brown hair draped over one shoulder, hands tucked modestly beneath a folded cloth. The mother enters once, then quickly retreats. You hear her sob in the hallway. The sound slips beneath the door like wind through a cracked window. You try not to listen, but you do. You always do. There's a vase of flowers on the table. Too fresh. Too vibrant. They don't match the room. You decide not to include them. Instead, you focus on her expression, or rather, the one you're building for her. You add a slight upward turn to her lips. Not a smile, never a smile, but something softer. Like she's mid-thought. Like she might blink. Just once, if given the chance. And still, the warmth in the room grows thicker. You loosen your collar discreetly. Wipe your forehead with the edge of your sleeve. Your pencil smudges slightly. You've learned to work quickly in these conditions. Time isn't just precious. It's urgent. Flesh betrays faster than paint can preserve. Halfway through, you pause. Your stomach twists, not with hunger, but memory. This warmth, this scent. You've been in this exact air before. Not here, not this house, but a room just like it. Years ago, where a boy of 7 lay wrapped in a quilt, and you had to keep repositioning your canvas because your hands wouldn't stop shaking. You steady yourself. You keep painting. Historians still argue whether mourning portraits sanitized death or dignified it, whether painters like you were preserving truth or creating it. But in these moments, with your palette heavy and your breath shallow, none of that matters. All that matters is making the family see something besides the decay. You finish the portrait by early afternoon. The heat hasn't broken. The fire still burns, low and unnecessary. You wonder if someone lit it out of tradition or maybe denial. You pack your things slowly. Wrap the canvas in a muslin cloth. Tuck it under your arm like you're afraid it might bruise. The father walks you to the door. He presses a coin into your hand. She looks peaceful. You nod. She wasn't, he adds, then closes the door before you can reply. Outside, the wind finally touches your skin. It smells of apples, soil, and something cleaner. You breathe deeply. You keep walking. You don't look back. And you still don't mention the smell. The room is warm. Too warm. That's the first thing you notice as you step through the doorway of the little house by the edge of the orchard. The air inside is thick, sticky with perfume, camphor, and the cloying scent of cut roses pushed too close to a dying fire. Someone's tried very hard to mask something. You know what it is. You always do. The girl in the shades has been gone for too long, longer than they admitted in the letter. Her skin is gray at the edges, her lips dry. They've combed her hair and powdered her face, but the truth clings to her like smoke. You set your bag down slowly, quietly. You don't comment on the heat. You don't mention the smell. You just nod at the father, who meets you at the threshold and says, "We wanted her, remembered how she was. Before the fever." You nod again. You say, "I'll do my best." You always do. You begin your work in the far corner of the room, where the light is poor, but the air is slightly cooler. You keep your coat on, not for warmth, out of habit. It makes you feel like a barrier between yourself and the task. The girl is 15, maybe 16, thin. Her cheeks still hold the remnants of a young flush, though you suspect it's rouge, applied hastily. Maybe by her mother, maybe with shaking hands. You draw the outline slowly. Her face is soft, but already changing. You adjust your composition. A slightly tilted head, a cascade of brown hair draped over one shoulder, hands tucked modestly beneath a folded cloth. The mother enters once, then quickly retreats. You hear her sob in the hallway. The sound slips beneath the door like wind through a cracked window. You try not to listen, but you do. You always do. There's a vase of flowers on the table. Too fresh, too vibrant. They don't match the room. You decide not to include them. Instead, you focus on her expression, or rather, the one you're building for her. You add a slight upward turn to her lips. Not a smile, never a smile, but something softer, like she's mid-thought, like she might blink just once if given the chance. And still, the warmth in the room grows thicker. You loosen your collar discreetly, wipe your forehead with the edge of your sleeve. Your pencil smudges slightly. You've learned to work quickly in these conditions. Time isn't just precious, it's urgent. Flesh betrays faster than paint can preserve. Halfway through, you pause. Your stomach twists. Not with hunger, but memory. This warmth, this scent. You've been in this exact air before. Not here, not this house, but a room just like it. Years ago, where a boy of 7 lay wrapped in a quilt, and you had to keep repositioning your canvas because your hands wouldn't stop shaking. You steady yourself. You keep painting. Historians still argue whether mourning portraits sanitize death or dignified it. Whether painters like you were preserving truth or creating it. But in these moments, with your palate heavy and your breath shallow, none of that matters. All that matters is making the family see something besides the decay. You finish the portrait by early afternoon. The heat hasn't broken. The fire still burns, low and unnecessary. You wonder if someone lit it out of tradition, or maybe denial. You pack your things slowly, wrap the canvas in a muslin cloth, tuck it under your arm like you're afraid it might bruise. The father walks you to the door. He presses a coin into your hand. She looks peaceful. You nod. She wasn't, he adds, then closes the door before you can reply. Outside, the wind finally touches your skin. It smells of apples, soil, and something cleaner. You breathe deeply. You keep walking. You don't look back. And you still don't mention the smell. They tell you she might not be dead. That's not exactly how they put it, but close enough. You arrive at the house just after dawn, boots still wet from the marshy road, and the first words out of the uncle's mouth are, "She passed in the night." We think. You pause. They lead you in anyway. The girl, 12, maybe 13, is laid out on a cot in the parlor. Her hands are folded neatly. Her face is pale, waxy, but peaceful. No visible trauma. Just stillness. You've seen it before. Sometimes the sick slip away so quietly, no one notices until the morning tea goes untouched. But then you see it. A little silver bell, tied delicately to her toe with white ribbon. Your stomach sinks. Just in case, the uncle mutters. You nod, slowly, like you're agreeing with the weather. They leave you alone with her and the bell. You set up your canvas at a respectful distance, close enough to see her eyelashes, far enough that you can pretend this is normal. You dip your brush in thinned sienna, then pause. Because here's the thing. What if they're right? What if she isn't gone? You glance at the bell. It doesn't move. You exhale and start to paint. You've painted many faces, but this one feels different. It's the possibility that haunts you. Not death, but maybe not death yet. You find yourself listening between brushstrokes for the sound of breath, a shift of fabric, a single chime. But there's nothing, only the whisper of your bristles against canvas, the occasional creak of the old floorboards settling, the rhythmic tick of a grandfather clock counting time she may or may not be part of. You try to focus. Her features are delicate, high cheekbones, a freckle beneath her eye, a mouth that seems to want to say something but forgot the words. You paint with precision, every detail, every shadow. The bell still doesn't ring. You think back to a story a painter once told you in passing about a woman in Boston who woke mid-portrait. The painter dropped his brush and ran screaming from the room. It became something of a cautionary tale or a punchline. You're not sure which. You try not to imagine it now. The brush slips slightly in your hand. You correct it. The light has shifted. The sky is clouding over. A storm, maybe. The wind taps gently at the windows like a guest with cold fingers. You keep glancing at that toe. The bell, a fringe Victorian precaution, has always unnerved you. Historians still argue whether its use was rooted more in superstition or in very real fears of premature burial, of medical mistakes, of waking in darkness with no one there to hear. You don't argue. You just paint. You soften her lips, lighten the circles beneath her eyes. You choose not to paint the bell. By late morning, the family gathers. They shuffle in like ghosts themselves, quiet and hunched, eyes red from exhaustion, more than tears. The mother touches your shoulder lightly. Her hand is cold. She was always so still, she whispers, even when she played. You don't answer. You can't. You're too busy listening. And then finally it happens. A twitch. The bell shifts, just barely. A whisper of sound, like a coin on porcelain. Your heart stops. Your brush hovers mid-air. The entire room stills. But no one else notices. You watch. 10 seconds. 20. Nothing more. You tell yourself it was the breeze. A floorboard. Nerves. It doesn't matter. You steady your hand and finish the last stroke. The portrait is beautiful. She looks peaceful, gentle, alive, in the way only the dead can seem when painted just right. You pack your things quickly. As you roll the canvas, you glance once more at the girl on the cot. Her chest doesn't rise. Her hands don't twitch. The bell is still. You leave before anyone can ask what you heard. On the road home, you don't look back, but you keep hearing that bell in your ears, in your dreams, in every quiet room that follows. Rain doesn't bother you much anymore. You've walked through sleet, hail, and even a late May snow once in upstate Vermont. But this rain is something else. It's not just falling, it's soaking, seeping into every seam, curling your canvas and turning the road to thick, horse-stopping sludge. Your wagon hits a rut and groans like it's considering retirement. You're halfway to a small cottage nestled in a valley known more for its orchards than its residents. The family sent for you 3 days ago, but storms delayed everything. They buried the boy yesterday. Today, they want a painting from memory, or what's left of one. You arrive dripping and stiff. Your coat is plastered to your back. Your boots squelch audibly with every step. A woman greets you at the door with a nod and a towel. No words, just exhaustion in the shape of a person. The boy's name was Eli, age 9. Fever took him quickly. There's no body, just a photograph, faded and crooked, and a few belongings laid out on a quilt in the sitting room. A wooden toy horse, a red scarf, a book with the cover missing. We want him in his Sunday vest, the father says, handing you a tiny black waistcoat. And holding this, he places the toy horse in your hand, as gently as someone might pass a newborn. You nod again. You're starting to forget how to say anything else. The photo is poor. His features blur at the edges. You squint and guess at the curve of his brow, the tilt of his chin. You ask questions, soft ones. Did he smile much? Always. Any freckles? Just one on his nose. You make notes. Sketch what you can. Then, as you unroll your damp canvas, you realize it's buckled from the rain. Perfect. You weigh it down with 2 pewter candlesticks and start anyway. Your hands are cold. The brush doesn't move quite right. Still, you work. You paint the boy sitting upright, vest buttoned neatly, toy horse tucked beneath one arm. His face is tricky. Too much shadow, and he looks haunted. Too much light, and he disappears. You find a middle ground, layering soft tones until he looks there, present. It takes longer than usual. The storm outside rumbles. Wind batters the shutters like a child demanding to be let in. You don't rush. You can't. By late afternoon, you're satisfied. Not proud, never proud, but it's him. The parents agree. He looks like he did on his birthday, the mother says. She touches the edge of the canvas. He wanted to be a preacher, said he liked the sound of his voice. You smile, just a little. As you pack your things, the father slips the red scarf into your bag. He always carried it, he says. Figured you could use it for future boys. You want to decline. Say no, thank you. I have too many scarves, too many trinkets, too many echoes in my studio already. But you don't. You nod. You take it. The road home is worse than before. The rain has turned into a curtain. Visibility is a suggestion. Your horse pulls slowly. Your wagon lurches. At one point, you get out and walk beside it, one hand on the reins, the other shielding the wrapped canvas beneath your coat. The painting is damp at the corners. So is your sleeve. Historians still argue whether these portraits were for remembrance or redemption, if they served the family, the painter, or the dead. You don't claim to know. You only know the road ahead is long, the canvas is crinkled, and Eli's faint freckle was the hardest thing you've ever painted. And tomorrow, there will be another child, another face, another scarf for the pile. The mother insists that he should look happy, not just peaceful, not just at rest, but happy, as if the eternal sleep he's now part of is really just a pleasant nap after playing with toy soldiers in the dirt. She meets you at the door with a tray of cold tea and trembling lips and says, "Please, when you paint him, make him look like he's with angels now." You don't ask questions. You never do. But that request, that one sticks. The boy is 5, maybe 6. They've dressed him in white, a gown with delicate lace at the collar that barely hides the bruises from fever that blot his neck. His arms lie flat. His mouth is slightly open, not with surprise or fear, just a slack absence of breath. You position your stool near the window. The light is lovely today, soft, blue-gray, the kind you only get right after rainfall. You let it fall over his face like a blessing. The room is too quiet. His older sister sits nearby with a small chalkboard in her lap, drawing the same crooked cat again and again. She doesn't look up. You begin your work slowly. You start with his cheeks. The fever has drained the color from them, so you paint it back in carefully. You mix rose and a whisper of gold, just enough to make him look flushed from laughter, not from sickness. You soften the eyes. They're closed, thank God. You've done your share of open-eyed commissions, but for children this young, it's better this way, more merciful to everyone. The mother enters as you're shaping the curve of his mouth. She leans in close, too close, breath hitching with every stroke. He loved peaches, she says suddenly, would eat them until juice dripped off his elbows. I couldn't get his shirt clean for days. You add the tiniest dimple, just one, like the memory of a laugh. Good. Do you think, she whispers, you could make him smile? Just a little. You hesitate. A smile can go wrong. It can look uncanny, too much like life, too close to something the brain wants to believe, but the heart knows better. But you try. A soft upturn. Gentle, tender. Just a hint of joy resting on the edge of his lips, as if he's about to say something silly, or about to wake. Historians still argue whether this practice was emotionally therapeutic or emotional theater, whether portraits like this helped grieving families heal, or whether they prolonged the illusion. Some even called it grief denial in oils. You just paint. The smile you've given him is careful. A boy's smile. One that still believed in birthday cakes, and bedtime songs, and peaches. Too ripe for napkins. His sister finally looks up. That doesn't look like him, she says. You freeze. She points to the drawing on her chalkboard. A stick figure with long ears and a crown. That's him. You smile gently. Maybe they're both him. She nods. Accepts this. Returns to drawing her cat. You add a faint glow to the background. Just a gradient, a soft fade from gray to warm. Not a halo, not heaven, but enough for suggestion. You finish before lunch. The mother stares at the portrait for a long time, longer than most. Her hand reaches up, fingers twitching as if tempted to touch the boy's painted cheek. She says nothing, but her eyes fill, and that's enough. You pack your things quietly. As you head for the door, she touches your shoulder and whispers, "You made him look ready, like he's just gone on ahead." You nod, you step outside. The sun breaks through the clouds. For once, the road home is dry. But the smile, his smile, stays with you. Because deep down, you know it wasn't his. It was the one she needed. You're not invited to the wake. You never are. By the time you finish the painting and wrap your brushes in their oilcloth cradle, the house has already begun its quiet transformation. Chairs moved, curtains drawn, black veils pinned, food laid out in uneven rows of ham and pie and uneasy small talk. But not for you. You're the one who comes before the casket is closed, before the preacher mutters words about dust and heaven. You're a guest of the dead, not the living, a craftsman, a transaction wrapped in linen and pigment, and you know your place. You step carefully over a muddy threshold, nod at someone's aunt who doesn't quite meet your eyes, and make for the front hallway. A child passes by, brushing your sleeve, then stops, stares at you, and whispers, "Are you the death painter?" You smile, politely, tiredly. "Just a painter," you murmur. They don't believe you. This house is louder than usual. More people, more rustling. Awake is many things: remembrance, performance, obligation. The deceased today is an old man, a grandfather, veteran of some forgotten war, father of six, breaker of at least two rocking chairs. A figure, not a mystery. But the grief here is still sharp. You were called early, told he passed quietly in the night. Heart gave out. They said, "You don't have to make him look young, just like himself." That's harder somehow. You find him lying in the bedroom, hands folded, jaw slack. They've dressed him in a suit too tight at the collar. A frayed Bible rests beside him, spine cracked, pages curled like old leaves. You paint quickly. The room is too full of motion. People pass by. A cousin peeks in. A neighbor shuffles through, whispering, "Is that the artist?" while balancing a tray of pickled eggs. You feel like an exhibit. You keep working. The lines of his face are deep, carved like worn leather. You trace them all. The scar beneath his eye, the crooked nose, the small patch of stubble someone missed while shaving him. You don't fix it. That's who he was. The daughter comes in once, touches the edge of your canvas, and whispers, "Don't forget the mole on his cheek. He said it was lucky." You add it. Historians still argue whether death portrait painters were servants or silent clergy, part of the ceremony or just adjacent. Some records list you under domestic services, others under miscellaneous. You know the truth. You're not clergy, not family, not friend. You're the last to arrive and the first to leave, and always through the back door. You finish just as the funeral guests begin to gather. You hear the shift, voices drop, shoes scrape against hardwood, chairs creak beneath grief. You wrap the painting. Someone offers you a biscuit from the kitchen. You take it out of politeness, tuck it into your coat. It crumbles anyway. The daughter thanks you. She doesn't say much, just nods and holds the painting like it might break in the light. You step outside into a wind that smells like chimney smoke and wet grass. From the porch, you can hear a hymn begin, faint, wavering, familiar. You've never stayed long enough to hear the second verse. You don't belong there. You never do, because you are the ghost who comes before the coffin closes, the guest who leaves before the food is served, the only one who paints them still breathing. You see their faces at night, not in dreams, not exactly, more like in the quiet moments before sleep, when the lamp is out, but your mind hasn't finished with the day. They hover, just behind your eyelids. The boy with the freckle, the baby with the bonnet, the girl whose toe had the bell. You've painted so many now, you've stopped counting. but you remember them, all of them. Their portraits line the walls of your studio, not the ones you gave to families, but the unfinished ones, the practice sketches, the copies you made for yourself, thinking you might turn them into a study someday, but you never do. They just sit there, watching. This evening, you're cleaning brushes, trying to forget. The studio smells of turpentine and lavender soap, a mixture you've long since stopped noticing. But tonight it's heavy, too familiar, a sensory echo. You light a candle, its flicker brings no comfort. The house creaks. You glance at a half finished canvas, leaning against the far wall, a teenage boy. You remember him clearly, died of typhoid. His mother had asked for a background of sunflowers, even though it was February. You painted them anyway, badly. You've never been able to look at that portrait for long. You stand, stretch your back, and pour yourself a small glass of whiskey. Just one. You sip it while pacing the floorboards, the glass warming in your palm as the faces around you quietly don't blink. There's one girl in particular. You painted her 5 years ago. Consumption took her, like it took so many. Her hair was red, unusual. You had to mix the pigment specially with rust and a hint of madder lake. She'd been gone almost 2 days when you arrived. You remembered because the room was cold and the windows were wide open. To keep her fresh, someone had whispered. She was the first you ever painted with open eyes. You can still feel her gaze. Some nights, you swear her portrait shifts on the wall. Not falls, just tilts, like she's leaning toward you, like she wants to be remembered a little more urgently. Historians still argue whether painters like you experienced secondary grief, whether being around so much death left a mark, or if repetition hardened you like stone. One scholar wrote that the mourning painter must have been a lonely creature, halfway between craftsman and priest, and wholly a stranger to joy. You'd argue with him if he weren't mostly right. You finish your whiskey. You cover the portrait of the red-haired girl with a cloth. You extinguish the candle, and still, when you lie down in bed, you can feel them. Not ghosts exactly, just memories that refuse to go quiet. A toddler's hand curled around a ribbon, a boy's eyes that never quite closed, a sister's voice saying, "That doesn't look like him." They drift in and out of thought like unfinished sketches, never quite fading, never quite asking permission to stay. You stare at the ceiling until sleep comes, and when it does, it brings dreams where faces float gently above you, not smiling, not scowling, just waiting. They ask you to paint someone who isn't dead yet. That's new. You receive the letter folded in a clean blue envelope, neat handwriting, the kind that suggests lace gloves and rigid posture. Inside, a request, a name, and a short, trembling explanation. "My mother is dying," it reads. "We know it will be soon. She knows too. She asked for you. You've never been summoned like this. Not before." Still, you go. The house is large. Not ostentatious, just old, careful, and built on the kind of wealth that doesn't need to speak loudly. A butler greets you with eyes that say, this isn't his first death. He leads you through quiet halls, with floors that swallow sound. You find her in the sunroom. She's propped up in a chaise longue, wrapped in a pale shawl, skin thin as parchment. But her eyes, oh, her eyes are alive. She watches you approach like she's studying a sculpture. She smiles faintly. "So, you're the man who paints the dead," she says. "How odd that we've never met sooner." You sit across from her. You don't correct her. You don't know how. "I don't want to wait until I'm cold," she says. "I want to see how you'll remember me." It's not a request. It's an invitation. One of the most intimate you've ever received. You unpack your tools with unsteady hands. There's something disarming about painting the living, especially when they know the painting is a rehearsal for the end. She poses elegantly, head tilted just so, hands resting gently in her lap. She reminds you of a museum piece, something still and beautiful, but with centuries of stories pressed quietly beneath the surface. You begin sketching. She watches you work. Her gaze doesn't wander. It's not flirtation or curiosity, it's control. I've buried 3 children, she says softly, and my husband, and my sister. I've seen enough mourning portraits to fill a wing of the Met. You pause. Did someone paint them all? She nods. Most of them. Yours are different. You don't ask how she knows. You just keep painting. Her features are angular, sculpted by age but not defeated by it. You trace the high ridges of her cheekbones, the crease between her brows, the curve of her lips as they hold still but remember laughing. She tells you stories as you work. About a ballroom in New Haven, about a train ride that derailed but didn't crash, about a boy named Henry who once gave her a lemon tart and kissed her behind a coat rack. Never married him, she says. He had a terrible singing voice. You smile as you sketch. This is the first portrait you've done where the subject responds. When you get the tilt of her chin right, she says, "That's better." When you soften the corners of her eyes, she nods slowly. It's collaboration, conversation, a goodbye folded into brushstrokes. Historians still argue whether mourning portraits were ever painted before death, or if this was a modern myth romanticized by literature. But here you are, proving that, once again, history doesn't always ask your permission. You finish by mid afternoon. The light has shifted, warming her hair into gold. She hasn't moved in hours. Can I see it? She asks. You hesitate. You never show your work before it's dried, before it's cured in quiet. But you turn it. She studies it in silence. Then she smiles. Good, she says. That's the face I want them to remember. You pack your things. She doesn't offer payment. She doesn't have to. Her words were payment enough. As you step into the hallway, the butler hands you an envelope. You tuck it away without looking. Outside, the air is sharp, and the trees have just begun to hint at autumn. You don't look back. You never hear from the family again. But 6 months later, in a small obituary tucked between advertisements for patent tonics and sewing machines, you see her name. You pause, and in your mind's eye, she's still sitting there, alive, ready, and in control. You never meant to collect their voices, but somehow they followed you, slipped between the bristles of your brushes, caught in the folds of your coat, settled in the grain of your studio floor like soot. Today it's a girl named Mary, 4 years old, died in her sleep. The family says she looked peaceful, like she was dreaming of something kind. They've dressed her in pink, a shade too bright for the room, too alive for the air. Her doll lies beside her, on the chaise, missing one shoe. Someone has curled her hair. You begin sketching quietly, trying not to disturb anything, even time. But as your pencil dances across the paper, you start to hear it. A whisper, not words, just sound. Memory, maybe. The way you might remember the echo of someone saying your name when you were half asleep. You pause. Hold your breath. Silence. You resume. You've been working in mourning so long now. Your brain plays tricks. Once, you heard a painting breathe. Another time, you swore a portrait blinked. You keep working. Outside, a bird sings, sharp and sudden, and you startle, smudging the cheek. You reach for a cloth to blot it, and there it is again. A voice, soft, faint. You freeze. You look around the room. No one. Just the doll, the pink dress, the child who won't wake up. You tell yourself it's your nerves, frayed, overworked. You've been painting for days without rest, without a meal that wasn't dry bread or half a potato. You begin again. Mary's cheeks are round, her eyes delicately closed. You give her a softness, a glow that isn't there in the room, a flush she never got to grow into. You look at the doll. Its button eyes seem too knowing. You look away. Historians still argue whether prolonged exposure to death created a kind of spiritual fatigue among mourning painters, visions, nightmares, even hallucinations. They debate whether it was grief or guilt or merely turpentine poisoning. You don't bother debating, you just listen. And there it is again, faint, high pitched, like a child's voice calling from under a blanket. You drop your brush. The mother enters at that exact moment, startling you further. She doesn't seem to notice your pallor. She just asks, would you mind including her doll? It was her favorite. You nod. You retrieve the brush. Your hand trembles slightly. You paint the doll. You give it the missing shoe. You finish the portrait just as the shadows lengthen across the carpet. The room has grown colder, though the windows are closed. You wrap the painting, careful with the edges. You glance once more at Mary. She hasn't moved. But in your ears, the whisper lingers. Just one word this time. Stay. You do not. You leave quickly, walking faster than usual, the wrapped canvas pressing hard against your ribs like it wants out. That night, in your studio, you hang Mary's sketch beside the others, and you whisper into the dark, no, just in case anyone's listening. Your hands shake when you wake up. It's not the cold. You've long since adapted to winter drafts and thin blankets. It's not hunger either, though your last real meal involved a questionable potato and something pretending to be beef stew. No, it's the dream, or whatever keeps replacing dreams now. Another face, half finished, eyes open too wide, lips moving, but no sound. Always the same whisper at the end. Still here. You pour water from the pitcher. It's tepid. You splash your face anyway, hoping it might wash the sleep off. Hard enough to start fresh. It doesn't. The girl from yesterday, Mary with the doll, is still sitting behind your eyes. You've been painting the dead for nearly a decade, long enough that people know your name in certain quiet circles, long enough that undertakers nod when you arrive, long enough that you don't get invited to weddings anymore. Today's commission is an unusual one, not a child, a brother. And not just any brother, a twin. The surviving twin answers the door. He's 17, tall, thin as a sapling. His eyes are rimmed in red, but his jaw is set like stone. He was only a minute older, he says, but he always acted like it was years. You follow him into the parlor. There, on the chaise, lies the body. They look identical, or rather, they did. The living one sits across from the couch and says, make sure you get it right. Don't mix us up. You nod. You sketch. You start with the jawline, same as the brothers. Then the hair, the lashes, the faint scar at the edge of the eyebrow that the living one insisted be included. He got it falling out of the barn loft, he mutters. I told him not to jump. You glance at him. And did you? He shrugs. Of course I jumped. You return to painting. This is new. A mirror half broken. Painting a face that still exists, still breathes, still watches you over folded arms. You wonder, as your brush glides across canvas, if he sees himself in the portrait or if it already looks like someone else. You add a ribbon to the lapel. The mother requested it. A symbol of the order of birth, she said. So we remember who was first, as if that matters now. Historians still argue whether twins were mourned differently in the 19th century, whether their bond intensified the grief or complicated it. Records are sparse, but letters reveal a peculiar ache, the feeling of losing half of yourself. The surviving twin doesn't speak again until you're almost finished. Then, quietly, will it feel like he's watching me? In the painting? You consider. Only if you look him in the eye. He thinks about that. When you show the finished piece to the family, the mother weeps. The father nods once, but the twin, he just stares, then turns and walks upstairs without a word. You wrap the portrait. You say your quiet goodbyes. As you leave, you spot something on the hall table, a mirror covered with black cloth. It's customary in mourning to shroud mirrors. They say the soul could get trapped in the glass. You've seen the practice before. It doesn't bother you until now, because as you pass it, you see a flicker. Not your reflection, just something moving behind the cloth. You don't stop. You don't look back. And when you get home, you cover your own mirror for the first time, just in case. You've started to hate the smell of violets. Once you liked them, thought they were pleasant, delicate, even soothing. Now they signal something else entirely. Death, not the moment of it. No, that's quiet, slow, unfussy. But the after, the dressing, the arranging, the presentation. People scatter violets like their armor against the unbearable. They tuck them into collars, lay them in cold hands, press them between prayer book pages. And when you smell violets now, you know what's coming. Today's house smells like a florist shop in mourning. Violets everywhere, bundles on windowsills, petals tucked along floorboards, bowls of crushed blossoms in the corners, like some kind of ceremonial offering. The subject is a woman, young, maybe 30, no illness, no long decline. She slipped and fell down a flight of stairs. One moment she was humming over dinner, the next she was a memory. That's how her sister puts it, through a clenched smile and teacup rattle. She would have hated this, the sister says. All the flowers. She liked moss and dirt and frogs. You blink. Frogs? She used to collect them. Had a whole shoebox under her bed when we were girls. One day they all got loose in church. She laughs. One bark, then silence. You begin your work. The woman is laid out in the back parlor, arms at her sides. Someone has dressed her in lavender silk, though you suspect she would have preferred boots and a pinafore. Her hair is coiled tightly. You loosen it a little. Not too much. Just enough to let one curl fall along her cheek. You imagine she was always the one who showed up to supper, barefoot, dirt on her knees, leaves in her hair. You try to paint that woman, not the posed figure in silk. You add a smudge to her thumb, the suggestion of earth, a whisper of who she was before violets filled the room. As you paint, the sister paces behind you. She wanted to be a naturalist, she says suddenly, wrote about mushrooms in her diary, wanted to go to Maine and study bogs. Bogs. Can you imagine? You can. You think she might have made an excellent bog wanderer. You soften the color palette, replace the violets in the background with hints of fern green and cool shadow. You know they'll never notice, but it matters to you. It matters to her. Historians still argue whether mourning painters were biographers in disguise, if every brushstroke was a line of secret narrative. You like the idea. It feels true, even if you never speak aloud what you've noticed. The dirt under the nails, the one stocking pulled higher than the other, the faint crescent scar beneath the chin. You finish the portrait? The sister leans over your shoulder. You made her smile. You hadn't meant to, but there it is, just a faint lift at the corners. A wild joy, like she's about to chase a frog through a church aisle again. The sister reaches for your hand. Thank you. I think you brought her back. You nod. But later, As you wrap the canvas and pass through the hallway choked with violets, you pause because you hear something, a soft sound, a ribbit. You stop breathing, you listen. Silence. You step outside, fast. You never mention it. But that night, when you return to your studio, you leave the windows open, just in case something wants to hop in. You get called to a hotel. Not a house, not a cottage, not even a tenement. A hotel. Grand, brick faced, with gaslight sconces and a velvet curtained foyer that smells like money, pretending not to mourn. The concierge doesn't look at you when he hands you the room key, just says, "She's on the third floor. End of the hall." You nod. You climb. The carpets are too thick for your boots. Your coat smells like linseed oil and damp wood. The wallpaper here is green and gold and slightly peeling, as if trying to forget that grief paid for the room. Inside, the room is hushed. A woman in her 40s lies atop a high brass bed. The curtains are drawn, but sunlight sneaks in anyway, casting her profile in soft relief. She's elegant even now, fingernails painted, hair still gleaming. A man sits beside the bed, thin mustache, stiff collar, whiskey breath even at this hour. She was an opera singer, he says. Went by Belladonna de Vere. Real name was Clara. Heart gave out after the last performance. You nod. You start to unpack. She'd like to be painted in costume, he adds, pulling back a wardrobe door with a flourish. This one, he gestures to a gown, the color of moonlight and crushed pearls. You raise an eyebrow. He shrugs. She always said she wanted to be remembered as a diva, not a corpse. You've painted stranger requests. You begin. Dressing the dead is never easy, but this time there's a maid. Silent, practiced, delicate, with every hook and clasp. The bodice fits perfectly. The neckline plunges more than usual, but the effect is striking. Clara, Belladonna, looks like she might rise any second and take a bow. You paint. Her cheekbones are sharp. Her lips, even now, wear a faint trace of rouge. You decide not to add anything that isn't already there. Make her eyes closed, the man says, but smiling, as if she's hearing the applause. You understand. It's theatrical mourning, grief, but with a spotlight. You add shimmer to her gown, just a hint. You paint her hands relaxed, like they've just released the final high note. You let her rest in a pose that feels poised, not frozen. Historians still argue whether mourners who staged the dead for portraits were indulging in fantasy or merely refusing the cruelty of sudden stillness. You think maybe both. You finish just before dinner. The man thanks you, slips a coin into your palm and asks, "You've painted many like her?" You hesitate. "No," you say, "only one like her." And it's true. She's the only one whose portrait you'll frame later. Not because it's better, but because it dared to be alive. You step back into the hallway. The gaslights flicker. A maid passes you, carrying a bouquet of white lilies and a silver comb. You descend the stairs. You pass the front desk. And then, just as the doors swing shut behind you, you hear it. Faint, but unmistakable. Clapping. A slow, echoing applause, fading into the hush of the lobby like the last ovation of a curtain call. You don't turn back, but you smile. The storm rolls in as you arrive. Not a dramatic one. Not thunder and lightning and tree-snapping winds, but a low, steady, bone-saturating kind of rain, the kind that seeps through hat brims and sleeves and seems to sigh as it falls. The sky is the color of old wool. The world feels muffled. Perfect weather for death. This time it's a farm. Dirt road. Soggy hens under a lean-to. A barn that leans just enough to make you nervous. You step carefully onto the porch and knock. The door opens halfway before you even touch it. Inside, Silence. Then a man appears, middle-aged, straw in his hair. He nods, points, says, "Upstairs, second left. You go." The stairs groan under your weight, the kind of groan that sounds almost human. You find the room. The girl is inside, 16 perhaps. The window is cracked, letting in both chill and the faint scent of wet hay. She fell from the loft, the man says from behind you, trying to rescue a kitten. Broke her neck. You close your eyes for a moment, then you set your bag down. Her face is soft, round, a freckle near the temple, like a brushstroke the heavens forgot to finish. She's still wearing her work dress, apron streaked with something dark, mud maybe. You don't ask to change it. The family seems to want her remembered just like this. She was stubborn, he adds. Hated shoes. You glance down. Sure enough, bare feet. You begin to paint. You decide to leave the apron. Leave the straw in her hair. Leave the hint of dirt on her knees. You make her look like she just took a break from chasing chickens, not like she landed wrong on a beam of rotting pine. As you work, the rain picks up. It taps the glass like someone too shy to knock. She wanted to be a school teacher, the man says suddenly. Said she was going to teach letters to every kid in the county, even the dumb ones. You smile. You paint her hands curled gently near her chest as if she's cradling an invisible book. Her mother's upstairs, he says. Can't come down. Keep saying her name. You nod. He stays silent after that. You paint slowly, carefully. She looks young, too young, but you try not to let that show. You lift her gaze just slightly, give her a softness, as if she's lying in a field rather than on a linen-draped mattress. Historians still argue whether post-mortem portraiture was more popular in rural areas because of isolation or because death simply felt more familiar there. You know the answer. It's both. Out here, grief doesn't arrive with fanfare. It shows up muddy, hands in pockets, and stays for supper. You finish the portrait before sunset. As you clean your brushes, the man touches the canvas. That's her, he says. That's exactly her. It's the closest thing to joy you've heard all week. He offers you a bowl of stew, and you take it this time. It's warm and peppery, and tastes like real food made by someone who isn't thinking too much. As you leave, the rain begins to lighten. He doesn't say goodbye. You mount your wagon. The wheels squelch back onto the road. You look once, just once, at the window upstairs. The curtains flutter. It could be wind, or it could be her, waving just one last time. You come home to silence. Not the kind you find in grave parlors or drafty hallways, but a deeper quiet. The kind that waits. That settles into the corners of your studio like dust. That recognizes you not as an intruder, but as something it raised. Your boots leave faint prints on the floorboards. Your coat drips a slow, steady rhythm onto the rug. You hang it without thinking. You unwrap the canvas from the farm. Place it gently beside the others. They're all here now. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Faces looking out at nothing. At you. At the space between. You light a lamp. Its flicker illuminates the girl with the book, the boy with the toy horse, the baby in the christening gown, the opera singer in silver, the one with the doll, the one with the freckle, and others, so many others, each with their little detail, their whispered story, their soft claim on your memory. You sit, not because you're tired, though you are, but because you're heavy, not with grief, but with accumulation. You think about how it all began. Just a single portrait, just a friend of a friend who couldn't bear the thought of forgetting. You'd said yes without thinking, without knowing what door you were opening or closing. Historians still argue whether death painters were a blessing or a burden, whether you preserved what mattered or merely prolonged what should fade. You don't argue, you listen, because even now, in the quiet of your home, you hear them. Soft voices, not haunting, not frightening, just present, like breath, like wind through an old coat, like pages turning in the dark. You pour a cup of tea and sit by the fire. Your hands are spotted with pigment. You rub your thumb and forefinger together absently, as if smoothing canvas. You let your eyes close, and when you open them again, the room has softened. The paintings are just shadows. The silence is just sleep settling in. And for once, just once, you let it carry you. Let's stay here for a moment. Let the air be still. Let the light from the fire flicker just a little longer on the edges of memory, where the brushstrokes still feel warm. The canvas is dry now. The brushes are clean. And the people you painted, well, they're resting. They always were. You've done enough for today. More than enough. Let your shoulders relax. Let your fingers unfurl. Let your breath deepen. Outside, the rain might still be falling. The trees might still be swaying. But in here, it's quiet. You've earned this hush. Think of that final portrait. Leaning against the wall, face turned slightly, as if listening for a story. They always listen. They don't speak, but they stay. That's the funny thing about mourning portraits. They're not really about endings. They're about holding on gently and letting go slowly. You don't need to remember every face, just the way the air felt in those rooms, the way the light fell on the cheek of someone who would never speak again, the way someone whispered, "You captured her," like it was the only anchor they had left. Close your eyes now. The faces can rest. So can you? No more stories for tonight. Just quiet. Just sleep. Good night, painter. You're home. End of script. Sweet dreams.